The Illustrious Defunct 49 by Charles Lamb. Napoleon has now sent us back from the grave sufficient echoes of his living renown. The twilight of posthumous fame has lingered long enough over the spot where the sun of his glory set, and his name must at length repose in the silence, if not in the darkness of night. In this busy and evanescent scene, other spirits of the age are rapidly snatched away, claiming our undivided sympathies and regrets, until in turn they yield to some newer and more absorbing grief. Another name is now added to the list of the mighty departed, a name whose influence upon the hopes and fears, the fates and fortunes of our countrymen, has rivaled, and perhaps eclipsed that of the defunct child and champion of Jacobinism. While it is associated with all the sanctions of legitimate government, all the sacred authorities of social order, and our most holy religion, we speak of one, PG 305 indeed, under whose warrant heavy and incessant contributions were imposed upon our fellow citizens, but who exacted nothing without the signet and the sign manual of most devout chancellors of the exchequer. Not to dally longer with the sympathies of our readers, we think it right to premonish them that we are composing an epicedium upon no less distinguished a personage than the lottery, whose last breath, after many penultimate puffs, has been sobbed forth by sorrowing contractors, as if the world itself were about to be converted into a blank. There is a fashion of eulogy, as well as of vituperation, and though the lottery stood for some time in the latter predicament, we hesitate not to assert that multis ille bonus flebilis occidit. Never have we joined in the senseless clamor which condemned the only tax whereto we became voluntary contributors, the only resource which gave the stimulus, without the danger or infatuation of gambling, the only alembic which in these plodding days sublimized our imaginations, and filled them with more delicious dreams than ever flitted athwart the sensorium of Alnaschar. Never can the writer forget when, as a child, he was hoisted upon a servant's shoulder in Guildhall, and looked down upon the installed and solemn pomp of the then drawing lottery, the two awful cabinets of iron, upon whose massy and mysterious portals the royal initials were gorgeously emblazoned, as if after having deposited the unfulfilled prophecies within, the king himself had turned the lock and still retained the key in his pocket. The blue-coat boy, with his naked arm, first converting the invisible wheel, and then diving into the dark recess for a ticket. The grave and reverent faces of the commissioners eyeing the announced number, the scribes below calmly committing it to their huge books, the anxious countenances of the surrounding populace, while the giant figures of Gog and Magog, like presiding deities, looked down with a grim silence upon the whole proceeding, constituted altogether a scene which, combined with the sudden wealth supposed to be lavished from those inscrutable wheels, was well calculated to impress the imagination of a boy with reverence and amazement. Jupiter, seated between the two fatal urns of good and evil, the blind goddess with her cornucopia, the park wielding the distaff, the thread of life, and the abhorred shears, seemed but dim and shadowy PG 306 abstractions of mythology, when I had gazed upon an assemblage exercising, as I dreamt, a not less eventful power, and all presented to me in palpable and living operation. Reason and experience, ever at their old spiteful work of catching and destroying the bubbles which youth delighted to follow, have indeed dissipated much of this illusion, but my mind so far retained the influence of that early impression, that I have ever since continued to deposit my humble offerings at its shrine. Whenever the ministers of the lottery went forth with type and trumpet to announce its periodical dispensations, and though nothing has been doled out to me from its undiscerning coffers, but blanks, or those more vexatious tantalizers of the spirit, denominated small prizes, yet do I hold myself largely indebted to this most generous diffuser of universal happiness. Ingrates that we are we to be thankful for no benefits that are not palpable to sense, to recognize no favors that are not of marketable value, to acknowledge no wealth unless it can be counted with the 5 fingers. If we admit the mind to be the sole depositary of genuine joy, where is the bosom that has not been elevated into a temporary Elysium by the magic of the lottery? Which of us has not converted his ticket, or even his 16th share of one, into a nest egg of hope, upon which he has sate brooding in the secret roosting places of his heart, and hatched it into 1,000 fantastical apparitions? What a startling revelation of the passions, if all the aspirations engendered by the lottery could be made manifest. Many an impecuniary epicure has gloated over his locked-up warrant for future wealth, as a means of realizing the dream of his namesake in The Alchemist. Many a doting lover has kissed the scrap of paper whose promissory shower of gold was to give up to him his otherwise unattainable Danae. Nimrods have transformed the same narrow symbol into a saddle, by which they have been enabled to bestride the backs of peerless hunters, while nymphs have metamorphosed its protean form into and all the braveries of dress, to say nothing of the obsequious husband, the two-footman carriage, and the opera box. By the simple charm of this numbered and printed rag, gamesters have, for a time at least, recovered their losses, spendthrifts have cleared off mortgages from their estates, the imprisoned debtor has leapt over his lofty boundary of circumscription and restraint, and reveled in all the joys of liberty and fortune. The cottage walls have swelled out into more goodly proportion than those of Baucis and Philemon. Poverty has tasted the luxuries of competence, labor has lolled at ease in a perpetual armchair of idleness, sickness has been bribed into banishment, life has been invested with new charms, and death deprived of its former terrors. Nor have the affections been less gratified than the wants, appetites, and ambitions of mankind. By the conjurations of the same potent spell, kindred have lavished anticipated benefits upon one another, and charity upon all. Let it be termed a delusion. A fool's paradise is better than the wise man's Tartarus. Be it branded as an ignis fatuus, it was at least a benevolent one, which instead of beguiling its followers into swamps, caverns, and pitfalls, allured them on with all the blandishments of enchantment to a Garden of Eden, an ever-blooming Elysium of delight. True, the pleasures it bestowed were evanescent, but which of our joys are permanent? And who so inexperienced as not to know that anticipation is always of higher relish than reality, which strikes a balance both in our sufferings and enjoyments? The fear of ill exceeds the ill we fear, and fruition, in the same proportion, invariably falls short of hope. Men are but children of a larger growth, who may amuse themselves for a long time in gazing at the reflection of the moon in the water, but if they jump in to grasp it, they may grope forever, and only get the farther from their object. He is the wisest who keeps feeding upon the future, and refrains as long pg 308 as possible from undeceiving himself, by converting his pleasant speculations into disagreeable certainties. The true mental epicure always purchased his ticket early, and postponed inquiry into its fate to the last possible moment, during the whole of which intervening period he had an imaginary 20,000 locked up in his desk. And was not this well worth all the money? Who would scruple to give £20 interest for even the ideal enjoyment of as many thousands during 2 or 3 months? Creed quod habes, et habes, and the usufruct of such a capital is surely not dear at such a price. Some years ago, a gentleman in passing along Cheapside saw the figures 1069, of which number he was the sole proprietor, flaming on the window of a lottery office as a capital prize. Somewhat flurried by this discovery, not less welcome than unexpected, he resolved to walk round St. Paul's that he might consider in what way to communicate the happy tidings to his wife and family. But upon repassing the shop, he observed that the number was altered to 10,069, and upon inquiry, had the mortification to learn that his ticket was a blank, and had only been stuck up in the window by a mistake of the clerk. This effectually calmed his agitation, but he always speaks of himself as having once possessed £20,000, and maintains that his 10 minutes' walk round St. Paul's was worth 10 times the purchase money of the ticket. A prize thus obtained has moreover this special advantage. It is beyond the reach of fate, it cannot be squandered, bankruptcy cannot lay siege to it, friends cannot pull it down, nor enemies blow it up. It bears a charmed life, and none of woman born can break its integrity, even by the dissipation of a single fraction. Show me the property in these perilous times that is equally compact and impregnable. We can no longer become enriched for a quarter of an hour, we can no longer succeed in such splendid failures. All our chances of making such a miss have vanished with the last of the lotteries. Life will now become a flat, prosaic routine of matter of fact, and sleep itself, erst so prolific of numerical configurations and mysterious stimulants to lottery adventure, will be disfurnished of its figures and figments. People will cease to harp upon the one lucky number suggested in a dream, and which forms the exception, while they are scrupulously silent upon the 10,000 falsified dreams which constitute the rule. Morpheus pg 309 will stifle Cocker with a handful of poppies, and our pillows will be no longer haunted by the book of numbers. And who, too, shall maintain the art and mystery of puffing in all its pristine glory, when the lottery professors shall have abandoned its cultivation? They were the first, as they will assuredly be the last, who fully developed the resources of that ingenious art. who cajoled and decoyed the most suspicious and wary reader into a perusal of their advertisements by devices of endless variety and cunning, who baited their lurking schemes with midnight murders, ghost stories, crim-cons, bon mots, balloons, dreadful catastrophes, and every diversity of joy and sorrow to catch newspaper gudgeons. Ought not such talents to be encouraged? Verily the abolitionists have much to answer for. And now, having established the felicity of all those who gained imaginary prizes, let us proceed to show that the equally numerous class who were presented with real blanks have not less reason to consider themselves happy. Most of us have cause to be thankful for that which is bestowed, but we have all, probably, reason to be still more grateful for that which is withheld, and more especially for our being denied the sudden possession of riches. In the litany indeed, we call upon the Lord to deliver us in all time of our wealth, but how few of us are sincere in deprecating such a calamity. Massinger's Luke, and Ben Jonson's Sir Epicure Mammon, and Pope's Sir Balaam, and our own daily observation, might convince us that the devil now tempts by making rich, not making poor. We may read in The Guardian a circumstantial account of a man who was utterly ruined by gaining a capital prize. We may recollect what Dr. Johnson said to Garrick, when the latter was making a display of his wealth at Hampton Court. "Ah, David, David, these are the things that make a deathbed terrible." We may recall the scripture declaration, as to the difficulty a rich man finds in entering into the kingdom of heaven, and combining all these denunciations against opulence, let us heartily congratulate one another upon our lucky escape from the calamity of a 20 or 30,000 pound prize. The fox in the fable, who accused the unattainable grapes of sourness, was more of a philosopher than we are generally willing to allow. He was an adept in that species of moral alchemy, which turns everything to gold, and converts PG 310 appointment itself into a ground of resignation and content. Such we have shown to be the great lesson inculcated by the lottery when rightly contemplated, and if we might parody M. de Chateaubriand's jingling expression, "Le roi est mort, vive le roi," we should be tempted to exclaim, "The lottery is no more, long live the lottery."